Oh! Well, thank you. Here's your prop.
He is a good sport, I'll tell you that much. So, when it comes to good game design, I often think you probably could get fired if you often were promoting the idea of having weaknesses in your game. I think what's interesting about that is, oftentimes players want to have, obviously a good sense of control in their games, and it could vary by game to game, but a good sense of control and accomplishment. Oftentimes in a game there's a goal, whether it's PvP or single player. And what's interesting about something I have just taken note of over the decades of playing games, whether it's competitive or single player, which can turn into competitive thanks to things like speed runs, and just kind of like showcases. Even Super Smash Brothers can become competitive from a single player perspective thanks to combo contests and its own break the targets speed runs. So what's interesting is that I have noticed that weaknesses are a great strength for good game design, and it often stems because rather than granting the player a character that is powerful in every aspect, right? That can be fun. In fact, I think that's a good post-game reward. We're talking about like getting Super Sonic, in the original Sonic the Hedgehog 2D games. Tremendous award. You have to get 7 Chaos Emeralds. You worked for that, and it's fun to do that after you beat the game. You can just power through, all these like potentially challenging levels. And so, but when it comes to core game design, I think that there have been cases where designers, and sometimes I think it might just come down to shareholders, they might like cave into people complaining about dying too fast to a game. But I think it's important to look at the broader demographic and not just like a vocal minority, because one misstep you can do in game design is if you cater too much to people that aren't willing to adjust themselves for skill, then when you make a game where the character basically can't die or there's not a lot of adversity, the game could get tiresome pretty fast. In fact, I mean, I guess at the end of the day, some of the companies just want to make sales, but I think there's more beyond that. And what if you made sales because the game was good? Now you have its longevity and legacy that can add to something that you can build upon. So, for example, in the Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask, Link can't jump, and those are some of my most favorite video games ever. And I think it's cool that this one design element of Link not being able to jump has players adjusting Link's linear mobility. I should say lateral mobility, but linear in terms of they're negating any type of like vertical jumping. And so what's cool is that as a player, the game is giving you all these other options and outlets, whether it's warping for mobility or you're using your hook shot, and also a lot of the well-renowned puzzles are involved with the fact that Link can't jump. And so oftentimes, because you can't jump, you really can gather your surroundings even more, rather than potentially blitzing through them, which for some games that works well, back to Sonic the Hedgehog. But even Sonic, what's cool about those games is, on the surface it looks like Sonic is all about blitzing speed, but you play like the 2D games on the Sega Genesis, and a lot of it can be pretty challenging platforming where you have to stop and jump. And I think that's great. I think that's actually posing a good weakness for Sonic's design, is that while he has the strength in being fast, you have to oftentimes earn that mobility, and you have to be careful. You can't be complacent. And I think that's what's cool, is that Sonic can't be complacent with his speed in these games, because when your screen is scrolling to the right, there could be new enemies right in front of you, so you have to be prepared to use his jump, and in later games the spin dash. So in Legend of Zelda's case, the dungeon problem solving and fighting really like hones in on the fact that Link can't jump, but there's so many other options, and I love that. And then you go into Majora's Mask, where Link has 3 prime transformations, and Deku Link, Goron Link, and Zoro Link all have their own strengths and weaknesses, and it's really cool. They didn't have to do that. They didn't have to make Deku Link instantly die to a fire attack. They didn't have to make Goron Link instantly die by drowning. And I actually didn't know this till later on, but Zoro Link has like a weakness to ice, and I think that's pretty cool too. And because I'm talking about that, but the strengths of these characters, Deku Link has really great mobility. His spin attack is a constant hitbox. The Deku Flower actually grants Link amazing vertical range. Not only does he jump, he's flying for a bit. That's awesome. I actually think that's a smart way to incorporate lateral movement for Link. Goron Link has a really strong roll where he can traverse through a lot of things without being stopped. He's also just really strong. And then Zoro Link's swimming is amazing, but he also has built-in boomerangs. And so Majora's Mask game design is really cool because those 3 transformations, add around to Link's kit in terms of options, but they bring their own weaknesses. And that's a lot of fun because now I can't just run around all the time with Deku Link, and if I do, I'm gonna have to be careful if there's like a Keese on fire, I just die. And that's good. It naturally can stop complacency in game design, and it constantly keeps you on your toes. And so when you take that into PvP, I've talked many times, almost every week, about some type of PvP game, and whether again it's chess, Super Smash Brothers, or Team Fortress 2. It's the dynamic of a player fighting another player is really interesting because now we're going into the psychology of it all. And that is when we as players bring in our own strengths and weaknesses. And I've talked about poker, and poker's an amazing game for this example. Because on the surface you think poker is just, random cards. Like, how does someone keep winning when the cards are randomized? But that's the thing, you have some options. And those options often revolve around looking at your opponent and like kind of getting good reads off them. Even if someone is stone cold silent, it's interesting that some of the best poker players are always looking for potential tells. I mean, to the point that look how many poker players wear sunglasses. Trying to hide like potential eye twitches if they get like a 2 and a 3, and potential like eyes widening when you get an ace and a king in your opening 2-card hand. And so the fun part about poker is the fact that you can get a hand like a 2 and a 3 and still win it all. If the game was all just aces, kings, queens, and jacks, well, first off, the jack would now be revered as the lowest card, right? In terms of power, just naturally. But it also would narrow out, the amount of dynamic play. But because poker has, quote, weak cards, its weaknesses having the 2, 3s, and 4s create a much more broader dynamic because these players can, again, win the whole pot off of a 2 and a 3. Or what's cool is oftentimes when you can, make a straight from the 2 or a 3, making an incredibly strong hand. And I think that's just, again, a big part of game design is getting your player immersed to think about the game. And that's often involved with bringing weaknesses into game design. And so, going to competitive Pokemon, even the god of the Pokemon world, Arceus himself, he has a weakness to fighting. Regular form Arceus is a normal type. He's got 120 stats for all 6 stats. He's definitely been banned from the get-go in Smogon singles and even in VGC, unless they do like a crazy unban of him, which they could do. VGC's been known to bring in banned Pokemon at times. But in terms of Smogon singles, Arceus has always been in Ubers, which is the ban list format. But even then, when you look at the ban list format, Arceus being a normal type, you could bring in a fighting type that's a bit faster than Arceus, whether you're choice scarfing your Larry or you clicked agility and clicked agility on your Primeape, or you hit the blunder policy double speed boost with your Guts Machamp, right? Now, yeah, you're definitely trying to outspeed Arceus there. Though I will say, Primeape does not learn agility. You could do something crazy. What's fun though, again, the whole point of this conversation though is as you're looking through, like, right, you're like, how do I counter Arceus, right? And you're like, okay, oh man, if only Primeape learned agility. And that's the fun part about Pokemon, is it's not about a Pokemon that learns everything. You know, there's always these jokes about, I wish this Pokemon learned that, I wish this Pokemon learned this. No, the beauty of it is the lack of what those Pokemon can learn, like what they can't learn. You know, a big long joke is people are like, oh, I wish Garchomp had Dragon Dance. But you know what's cool is the fact that Garchomp doesn't have Dragon Dance, and now you adjust accordingly. So Primeape doesn't have agility, and Arceus is naturally faster than Primeape. Well, I mentioned Blunder Policy, which is an item that says when you miss, your speed doubles. You do pair that with Dynamic Punch, and now Primeape can naturally be faster than Arceus. There could be different speed adjustments, but there's a lot of ways to adjust accordingly. You could bring in your own Kricketune with Sticky Web and have speed control over Arceus that way too. That's the fun part, is how as a player you're intuitively adapting to your weaknesses. GimpyFish62 many years ago talked about how playing with your weaknesses is vitally important. He mains Bowser in Melee, and I know he played Bowser a bit in Brawl, and then he plays Bowser in P+. And he talks about it's important to recognize the weaknesses of your character, because then you can adjust accordingly and use their strengths, push the strengths. And again, I think that goes back to core, strong, fundamental good game design, is make sure these characters have weaknesses, not just because the opponent can exploit it, but it keeps your players from continuously staying engaged. There's a little bit of quote peril or something on the line, and so you're always making sure that you're adjusting accordingly. And I think what's really cool about that is when you find these combinations to push your strengths, you also could be covering for your weaknesses. I talked a while back about maining Pyro in competitive TF2 and how he works with the combo, which is Medic, him, Demo Man, and Heavy. And what Pyro does is he watches them. He covers their back, because characters like Spy could exploit the weaknesses of the other three by being super forward facing. Like Heavy, Demo Man, and Medic often face forward. They're trying to create space for their team. They're trying to create a lot of progress, sustain the progress, and heal your teammates. So when that happens without a Pyro, in fact, in competitive, if I'm playing Spy and I hear that the opposing Pyro's dead, it's game time. You often can just go in and try to get a few backstabs. Now the class that can counter your plays there is gone. And so what's cool about TF2 is all 9 of those classes are, they're specialized to do their own thing. And so they all have their own respective weaknesses to other classes. And so you as a team need to be engaged with covering each other's weaknesses. You don't have to. And that's the beauty of TF2's good game design, is that Valve kind of understood that not everyone's going to want to always contribute to the team all the time. But they found a way to that when you, quote, selfishly play, when you're playing just to get kills for yourself, you're already contributing a lot. If you're Sniper and you shot the opposing Medic, that does a lot for your team. You could have just stopped an Uber charge there. If you're Heavy and you just want to gun down the opponents, nice. Guess what? You just probably created a lot of space for your team to sustain there. You are a good anchor, raid-like boss as a character. And so Valve perfected this way that where if you play, quote, selfishly, you are still contributing to your team. But now, what if you applied a bit of selflessness? And so as the Pyro, one of his strengths is ambushing using the flamethrower, and trying to get kills for his team. But when, like I mentioned earlier, when you're willing to help cover your other teammates' weaknesses, whether it's, again, spy checking or reflecting projectiles away from your team, you also can be helping out, your teammates' weaknesses so that they could continue to make space. It's a lot of fun. I think it's a core part of good game design. And to the point that both obviously Pokemon TCG and TF2 Highlander played a big factor for my own game. And with Pokemon TCG Highlander, I took those design attributes from the Diamond Pearl Platinum format, especially, where back then, those Pokemon, the damage scaling was a lot lower compared to now. With Gen 9 Scarlet and Violet sets, the HP was a lot lower too. And oftentimes Pokemon had a lot of options. They had a lot of options, but you oftentimes had to meet different criterias to achieve knockouts. And so I wanted to take that over to my game design, and now incorporated with TF2 Highlander, where there's only one of each Pokemon. You could find a strong Pokemon like Machamp, and you're like, okay, so Machamp says I knock out the defending Pokemon if they're a basic. Bam, instant knockout for 1 energy. That's really good. I'm gonna add Metagross and Lumineon to try to pull up my opponent's benched basic Pokemon and get knockouts. Alright, that's great. Now Machamp's weak to Psychic. So my opponent, pulls up their Mewtwo and hits Psychic for knockout, right? They amplified Mewtwo a little bit with some damage modifiers. Machamp is ×2 weak to Psychic, so, even just like 1+ power could be it. And so now that my Machamp's knocked out, the actual weakness listed on Machamp was something that was exploited by my opponent, and now as a player, I have to make sure I wasn't complacent and I'm willing to adapt accordingly. Pick myself back up, get back on my feet, and now it looks like Lumineon's about to attack, if I was prepared for it. That's the fun part. Can a game be designed to incorporate players to be prepared for if plan A doesn't go their way? And so rather than putting your eggs all in one basket, you do promote plan A, which is try to get knockouts with Machamp. But if Machamp goes down, are you prepared to attack with Lumineon? Do you have cards to recover Machamp? Do you want to use the attack on Metagross, even though you oftentimes see Metagross on the bench in this deck, trying to just pull Pokemon up and lower the HP? It's pretty interesting, in fact, to the point that Metagross lowers Machamp's HP, which can, be a weakness that Psychic types can exploit, like Mewtwo, not even needing modifiers with him out. And that's just a lot of part of what goes on with how I wanted to design that game, incorporating from those other 2 games. Because I think there is a beauty in game design to where characters can promote really good strengths, but they still have their own weaknesses to be exploited. And I think that just naturally creates intuitive game design for intuitive players that want to keep engaging and improving. And again, it's both for multiplayer and single player. So with a game like Mario 64, Mario has a lot of movement options. And aside from like help signs, the game doesn't really tell you how to get these power stars. So the fun part is that while Mario can't just, triple jump, while Mario can't just fly until he gets a wing cap somewhere, you have to use all of your, mobility options and terrain to figure out how to get these stars. And it's a lot of fun, and there's something on the line. You have health, and if you lose all your lives, you start out at the castle grounds again. So it is good to create a little bit of, danger in terms of, losing all your health. And so now how can you avoid enemies, avoid falling, while also getting to your objective? And again, while the game doesn't deliberately tell you how to do everything, not that that's a bad thing, but this is more about Mario 64's amazing game design in getting the player to creatively engage with the world and problem solve. I think problem solving with weaknesses is just something good to have in life in general. I love Mondays.